So the 10 ox herding pictures date from the 12th century, China. And actually there have been other ox herding pictures. There's a series of 8 and a series of 12. There may even be a series of 5. So one is not right and another is not wrong. I just chose this set because there have been a number of studies of it. And it gave me a source to work with. So the particular source that I'm using is Yamato Roshi's, which was translated by Victor Sogen Hori. And he writes quite nicely. He gave a series of talks on the ox herding pictures in Sesshin to his monks. So it's quite a serious set of lectures. And the ox herding pictures were drawn, and the verses, there's a verse which I put on the back, a verse and a preface, and something called a waka. I'm not sure what a waka is. I tried to look it up but couldn't find it. Maybe by next week I'll have discovered what a waka is. By a priest named Kakuen Shion Zenji. So he is the artist, not of this drawing. This drawing was done for Daido Roshi at Zen Mountain Monastery quite a few years ago. He is I don't know how many of you may have been up there, but he's got those pictures on the wall of his dining room. He's deceased, but they're quite powerful drawings. So, and he also wrote a small book to go with the pictures of the drawings, which I'm also using as a source. And I liked his drawings. There was something very free about them that appealed to me. So I used his drawings, or his paintings, and the verse and the preface and the waka from Kakuen Shion Zenji. That's what he wrote. So the pictures as a series fundamentally expound the teaching that we are all already enlightened. So this in itself is already a koan. If we're already enlightened, why don't we realize it? Why do we feel so confused? Why is this mind so crazy-making? And the purpose of the ox herding pictures is to show us that the task of realizing our own enlightenment is like the taming of a wild ox. So back in 12th century China, oxen were considered sacred. They were honored and precious. And as you probably all know, in India, oxen and cows and members of that family, water buffaloes, are all treated with great veneration and given the rite of passage, in fact. So a cow walking across the street, walking across a road, stops all traffic. Nobody rushes it. Causes everybody to pause in their frenzied day and take time out to allow the oxen to pass. What a wonderful moment. Huh? I don't know India, but I know Sri Lanka, and I've seen many oxen or cows or water buffalo cross the paths and stop all the traffic. And it is indeed quite a sight. They're very big. So the point is that we all already have Buddha nature, but we don't see it. So our Buddha nature is what brings you here today. It's what gets us to the cushion right at the beginning. And when we first begin to sit, we feel like nothing at all is happening. Our experience is our mind is racing, we're engaged with work or family or whatever else is on our minds when we sit on the cushion. Are we really doing it? Nothing's happening. Am I doing it right? I must be doing it wrong. My mind is not clear. We have so many expectations. It takes a long time to get rid of all those expectations of what we think should happen. And yet, things are happening. We just don't know what they are, so we don't know to recognize them. So we begin to tame the mind. We begin to tame the mind just as the ox herders in 12th century China tamed the ox. It's a really good story in Yamada Mumon's book about Nanshan and the ox. Any of you who have done a little koan work probably know Nanshan. He's the famous teacher who cut the cat in two. So I'll just pause and tell that story quickly because it's quite a dramatic story. There was a cat in the monastery that the monks were fighting over. And the east side of the hall was taking one position with regard to the cat, and the west side of the monastery was taking another position with regard to the cat. And Nanshan got totally fed up. He picked up the cat by the scruff of its neck, and he said, if someone can say a turning word about this cat, I won't have to cut it in two. He held up his sword in the other hand. And there was a complete silence in the monastery. Nobody could say a word. Nobody could say a single word to save that cat. So Nanshan cut it in two. Now personally, I always doubted this story. I can't believe it. A Zen master would cut a cat in two. But it's a very powerful story about how our minds can be completely stopped and we don't know what to say. That was very powerful. So Nanshan is not a gentle teacher. I think that's probably true. This story is, he came into the monastery and one of the monks was preparing the bath. And he said, what are you doing? And he said, it's my turn to prepare the bath water tonight. And Nanshan said, well, give the ox a bath first. So the monk, who had a little understanding, said, oh yes, I understand. And when the bath water was ready, he went to Nanshan's quarters and knocked on the door and he said, Mr. Ox, the bath water is ready. And Nanshan said, well, have you got a rope to bring him? And the monk was stopped again. Mind completely stopped. And just then, Joshu, his famous student, came in and he said, Joshu, can you help this monk? He has offered the ox a bath but brought no rope. So Joshu immediately leaped up, grabbed Nanshan by the nose and said, come on, Mr. Ox, come on, Mr. Ox. And Nanshan said, okay, don't be so rough. So that's a good ox story. Because we have to take our own ox by the nose. And we do that so simply, by taking the focus of our attention away from the stories in our mind and focusing on our breath. That single object of attention begins to tame our minds. And as we do it, things start to happen. But in the beginning, which is what this picture is about, we are just searching. So searching itself is enlightened behavior. It is the manifestation, the beginning of the manifestation of an enlightened life. We are seeking. And we seek for a long time. We seek for a long time. The mind gradually does get tamed. And then, of course, it gets untamed. So I want to just look at the words on the back. Till now, the ox has never been lost. Why then do you need to search for it? So this was Dogen's question, Dogen Zenji. Dogen became a monk at the age of 7 or 9. And he had this question: if I'm already enlightened, why do I need to practice? He spent really much of his life, it took him to China, in fact, even though he'd lived in a monastery from the age of 9, it took him to China to really understand the answer. And these questions, we all hold questions. You might think about what question brought you to practice. This is called the great doubt, these questions. I think my question was, what is the meaning of my life? What am I here for? Why am I here? People have different questions, but the questions are very, very important. Holding those questions, living those questions, what carries us deeper. And then we need great faith. Faith that there is an answer to the questions and that we can find the answer, that we can experience the answer. And then there's great determination. It takes great determination to stick with the practice, to stick with the questions, and to stick with the faith that they can be answered. And that's what it takes to get through this first phase of just seeking. And the seeking is interesting. You notice in this picture that the monk is looking backwards. Because we come into this practice so conditioned with all the things that cause us to suffer. Our desires, our passions, our competitiveness. It's hard to give them up. In fact, in the beginning, you can't even imagine giving them up. You can't imagine not identifying with them. They are who you are. And so moving our attention to our breath allows this tiny little separation between who we are and our identification with all of our passions, all of our desires. We get caught up in the 3 realms. The realms of desire, the realm of desire, the realm of form, of things, believing there are things outside of ourselves, and the realm of the formless, the realm of the mind, which we think is the truth. Our thoughts are true. We can't imagine that they're just objects arising in our minds. takes a while to get that they're just objects that float through the back of our heads, or wherever our mind is, actually, since our mind is not equivalent to our brain. Soon as we begin to sit, we're in connection with our Buddha nature. Even though our mind is busy, the fact that we're on our cushion is our first connection. We don't recognize our Buddha nature, but it recognizes us. It immediately recognizes that something has started. It's there, and we are nurturing it by sitting. We are feeding it. Not everybody can stick to it. Some give up. Others are intermittent. Some give up and come back. In fact, almost everybody gives up and comes back periodically. It's a rare student who recognizes immediately that this is her true path. Somehow, the rest of us just keep at it, not knowing why we're doing it. I used to think of it as kind of addiction. You know, I'd fallen into this practice and I couldn't get off the train. I was on this train and it was just carrying me forward. I didn't really understand it. It was mysterious. And the mystery is very important because this practice carries us forth into mystery. In fact, in order to proceed, we have to recognize there's a lot we don't understand. Not knowing is very important in Zen practice. So we enter this path looking for our ox, not knowing exactly what it is that we're looking for. When we recognize our ox when we find it, it takes us through all kinds of brambles and forests and fields and pastures and forests and brambles and fields. Weeds grow everywhere. We can't see. There's no clarity. But we continue, or we come back. We come back to try again. So this first phase requires that great doubt, that great faith, and that determination. That we allow all of those to come into being within us. We have to let go at the same time of any goal, of any thought of attainment, of any hope. Because hope is in the future. And our task is staying in the present. So if you look at the verse, the only sound, I'll read the verse actually. Beating about the endless wild grass, you seek and search. The rivers broaden, the mountains stretch on, and the trails go ever deeper. Your strength exhausted and spirit wearied, no place allows you refuge. The only sound, evening cicadas, shrill in the maples. So the cicadas are in the present moment. The rest is wild grass. brambles and forests.